The wind that swept down the main street was surprisingly cold for a summer's breeze, and Pashara felt not all too happy. The rain didn't help the matter. She had never liked riding, and here she was, sat atop a horse, freezing. Her nose itched to boot. It had been for the entire journey. She did not like riding. To try and distract herself, she gazed at the city around her. The buildings were tall and made of wood. She could see the occasional stone or brick building, but they were few and far in between. The main street was neatly paved with large, flat stones, but it had been repaired with rough cobble in many a place. Just like Thalen and Tela before her, she noticed how run down the city was. She had never cared about history in the same way that Thalen did, and had not had an over-domineering mother like Tela had, forcing her to learn every part of it. But even she knew a little of the past glory of Daerol. A patrol of guards had formed around them, leading them into the heart of the city. The men kept the mass of people that had conjugated at bay. They emerged into a large circular square, the square of Elidas, she guessed. On their left as they entered it was the husk of a building, blackened timbers laying in heaps of ash. To think that Thalen and Tela had been in that place. Her mood fell further. They could still be captured. More people had gathered on the square. Some simply stood in silence, but many were talking amongst themselves. She caught a few hushed words. Mages, what if they curse us? Should leave this land. Pashara smirked. It was somewhat enjoyable being feared. The guards cleared a path for them, and they continued towards the heart of the city. Even from outside the walls she had seen the tower, tall and mighty, its facade well kept despite the city's appearance. Its buttresses rose tall, as did the many spires. The tower became hidden behind the inner wall as they approached. Soon they passed beneath the gate into the city's center. They came into a large open space, over 200 meters across. The tower rose at the heart of the space. 4 round side buildings stood around it. They were connected to each other and the tower by roofed walkways. Pillars of black marble rose 10 meters tall, holding up the copper roofs. At the base of each pillar stood a statue gazing out. They alternated between male and female, each after the other. They were hooded, their carved faces shielded from the rain. Each held a staff. Before the structure was a well-kept garden. Lilac hedges formed quaint sections in which roses and tulips of varying colors grew. There were also ponds in which water lilies flowered. Old willows rose next to the ponds. their hanging branches swaying in the gust. There were ducks swimming in the water, their quacking adding a continuous noise to the scene. Some distance to their left stood a large building, the barracks where Tevilithen had been kept. Before they went further, they dismounted and left their horses at a small stable next to the wall. Then they were led by the guards to the tower. Steps led up to the walkway, following its curve. These they ascended, passing by the statues and the pillars. The brief respite from the rain was nice, but soon they were beneath the clouded sky again, as they descended from the walkway and into the tower's courtyard. A narrow avenue lined with oaks led to the tower's entrance. It was a large, arched door, made of heavy wood. Into it had been carved motifs from Daeria's history. The Daerol, the little songbird, was depicted on much of the door. On the keystone of the arched portal, not the magical kind, was carved the pentacle of Telanos. It was very similar to the guild symbol, and its presence here was a remnant of a different time. As they approached, the doors were opened, and they left the rainy, grey outside behind them. They entered a large circular corridor, which girdled the central chamber. The walls on either side had panels with motifs from old Tevilithen, mostly of the arcane order, but also of kings being victorious on the battlefield. Before them was a large door. They were bid to stay, as one of the guards entered the chamber beyond. Tevilithen would be so jealous if he saw me now, Pashara thought with a smile, as she gazed about. After some time the doors were opened, and they were ushered in. The chamber they entered was the very heart of the tower. It was circular, about 20 meters across. At the far end was a circular dais. 5 steps led up to its top. A great arch stood atop it. Pashara recognized the arcane glyphs etched into the stone. Along the walls stood pillars of black marble, their white bases pointing inwards. In between the pillars stood statues of hooded figures, similar to those on the outside of the building. The chamber stretched upwards, perhaps a full third of the tower itself. An inset walkway circled the chamber far above, some 40 meters up. There windows let light in, but little of that light fell to the floor of the chamber, which added a gloom to everything. When this had still been a tower of the arcane order, there must have been many magical lanterns lighting the space. But now it was lit by ordinary lanterns, and a few candelabras. Guards were stationed along the chamber's wall, some with halberds, some with crossbows. At the far end of the chamber, in an elaborate chair on the dais, just before the arch, sat Rana Amare, Grand Duchess of Daeria, Duchess of Daerol. She was in her mid-50s, but looked deceptively younger. Her hair was ebon and curly, her eyes a dark grey. Those eyes now attentively looked at the trio, moving from one to the next as they entered. Her face was upturned, her expression a mocking indifference. Feigned, most assuredly. Tevilithen bowed, as did Hyldra. Reluctantly, Pashara followed suit. The Grand Duchess looked at each in turn as she spoke. Mage Tevilithen, Magi Hyldra. She stopped, an eyebrow raised. Tevilithen indicated to Pashara to speak. Mage Pashara, my lady. I welcome you to my city, Rana said after a second. One could have wished it was under better circumstances. We fully understand your anger, O Grand Duchess, Tevilithen began, and we offer our deepest apology for the transgression. Enough with your appeasement. I want answers, Magi Tevilithen, not this grovelling. The Grand Duchess said, I made myself quite clear last time, when Helther snuck into my city, of the consequences would such a thing happen again. And here we are. Her gaze lingered on them, her face stern. Tevilithen seemed unfazed by her anger. We had to act with speed and secrecy, my lady, he said. And why was that? Now Tevilithen explained the situation, telling the Grand Duchess of the stolen documents and kidnappings. While he went over the events, Pashara studied the woman. Her countenance was near inscrutable, but she managed to catch a few hints of interest coming from the Duchess. A slight raised eyebrow here, a slight frown there. She didn't seem most interested with the events Tevilithen described. We have also had strange occurrences. Perhaps they are connected. She mused, seemingly more to herself. But it does not excuse what you did. And we know, my lady. We are prepared to pay reparations for the transgression. And believe us, His Majesty has made sure that it will not happen again. And what am I to do if my troops capture your mages? Surely Ambassador Marbaaran has given you His Majesty's letter on the matter. That any execution of Elrian nobility will lead to war. The Grand Duchess was silent. I see through his bluff, she said, at last. His and Ilistia's. Without her support, Roral would not dare attack. And she has more pressing matters. uprisings both in Aethigia and in Aethoria. And one cannot forget the rebels in Melicia either. And to boot, there is the growing hostility between Anmara and Ealin, as well as her helping the dwarves with the goblin problem. Her resources are stretched thin. I have ample enough time to prepare for war would I need to. So tell me again, Magi Tevilithen, why should I show leniency on your mages? Pashara had had enough. And that does not excuse you ordering Thalen's execution, she blurted. The Grand Duchess's eyes fell upon Pashara, who met her gaze. Pashara, Tevilithen said, "What did I tell you?" She cast a glance at the dark elf. His face was stern. In this land, mage, I rule. I do not make exceptions to laws that I have made just because the criminal is a noble of another realm. So you would risk war. Rorel does not need Listia's help to pose a threat to you. Pashara, Tevilithen said again. Hyldra remained silent. Pashara continued. You would risk war, all because of your pride and self-importance. For a few seconds the Grand Duchess said nothing. The silence was palpable. A few of the guards shifted nervously. Choose your next words carefully. Do mind that the guards have crossbows loaded with dark iron. Now Hyldra spoke. And do mind, Grand Duchess, that against me they would do nothing. Pashara's remark was not apt for the current circumstance. That is true. And we will definitely make sure she knows that. But that is no reason to threaten her. If you lay but a finger on her. Not helping, Hyldra, Tevilithen said with a sigh. Please pardon her, Grand Duchess. She's never been one to, she doesn't do well with people of authority. You should not have brought her then, Magi Tevilithen. We will speak further of the events tomorrow, as it is getting late. Without this young mage. You will all have quarters in the Arian embassy, and there you will stay until ordered otherwise, as you do not have leave to roam the city on your own. You can leave. Tevilithen bowed, as did Hyldra. For some seconds Pashara refused, but then, very reluctantly, she bowed as well. As they left the chamber, the Grand Duchess said a final remark. And do keep your dog on a leash while you're here. Pashara walked back and forth in the room at the embassy. Her anger at the Grand Duchess had not subsided. They had been given dinner at the embassy, and had dined with the ambassador Muhiren Marbaaren. She had thought him quite dull, though both Tevilithen and Hyldra had taken to the conversation with gusto. When dinner was done, she had excused herself and left for her quarter. Her blood seethed. How dared this woman speak of her friend like he was some piece in a game? How dared she speak to her like that? She sighed and took a deep breath. Then she made herself ready for bed, donning her sleeping gown. She lay down in the bed, and after a while began to drift off. A few minutes passed, and despite her fury, she fell asleep quickly. Some moments after, she had fallen asleep. The door creaked open, and in stepped a man in a dark, hooded cloak. He crept towards the bed, minding his steps. For a moment he stood, watching her. Then he drew forth a dagger from the cloak.